Who's Oregon's best defensive player? That question came in from Jonathan. You can be a part of the mailbag as well. YouTube comments, X, formerly known as Twitter, at SMcLaughlinCFB or at Locked On Ducks. Priority access given to those who are Locked On Ducks insiders. That link in the description below. You can get a free 14-day trial. You get all sorts of other perks as well. Jonathan asks, who is Oregon's most important defensive player? Now, is this a distinction between best defensive player? I don't really think so. There could be a scenario where you see that as the case. I don't apply that here. So on the surface, I think a lot of people would look at Jordan Burch and say, well, I mean, he's just been phenomenal. Oregon's undefeated when Jordan Burch doesn't play this year. Bet you hadn't thought about that, huh? Yeah. I mean, they're undefeated when he also plays because they haven't lost a football game yet. But Jordan Burch is someone who'd be very near the top of this particular list. And to say that he's Oregon's best defensive player, he can be. Derek Harmon can be. But Harmon wasn't even as good as Jamari Caldwell on Saturday. Both were really good. Both were really, really good. Anytime you generate pressure to hold a guy under 100 yards passing and keep a team under 4 yards per carry, your defensive line, they're playing really well. So both those guys are really good. Well, Matayo Uiagalelei is the one who's the reigning co-defensive player of the week. I know this sounds like a cop-out. Just bear with me here. I promise I'm going to explain this. The answer to this question always lies on the defensive line, but changes each week. And that's a great thing. Great thing for Oregon. If you think back to a defense that gets referred to plenty on this show because it was very good, 2019 Pac-12 and Rose Bowl champions with Kayvon Thibodeau, who came on later in the season as true freshman, Verone McKinley on the back end, Brady Breeze, Javon Holland, Diamondor Lenore, who just got paid big time in the NFL. Speaking of the NFL, how good is Bo Nix? Really, really good. Really, really good. Thomas Graham. Anyway, that unit was really good. And I think this Oregon defense is even better than that one. And one of the reasons is that the defensive line depth and linebacker depth, but particularly the defensive line, is a lot stronger. So that unit's secondary was just awesome. They made plays. They were good in coverage. They could tackle. They did a lot of things really well. The defensive line was also solid. They were a real solid unit. And then by the end of the year, once he'd gotten into the groove, Kayvon Thibodeau became, arguably the most disruptive defensive lineman since Haloti Ngata. DeForest Buckner would have to be in there as well. This defensive line's ability to have any one of those top three guys, Burch, Matayo, Derek Harmon, be the best defensive lineman on every given week is a really good thing, and it's legitimately how I feel. I can't land on one particular guy because this past week it was Matayo. But against UCLA, well, Matayo was kind of quiet compared to Jordan Burch. And Derek Harmon was phenomenal against Ohio State. So was Matayo. And I can make the argument for Jordan Burch, but Oregon's defensive line has played great. They played great against Wisconsin without him. They played great against Ohio State without him. They sacked Will Howard a couple times. They kept the running game wildly in check beyond what a lot of people thought they were going to be able to without Burch in there. And of course, Oregon's defensive line is at its best when Burch is wreaking havoc. Go ask Maryland how disruptive he can be. On any given day, it can be any one of those three guys. But a great defense, there has not ever been in the history of football a great defense that is not disruptive up front. And Oregon's depth is really, really good. But over the course of the season, I don't have one of those guys that I automatically lean to. Maybe you take Burch out of that top two discussion by a slim margin because Oregon has produced so well without him, and thankfully we haven't had to see this defensive line without Matayo or without Derek Harmon. But man, it's any given week, any given play, any of those guys can look like the best or the most important defensive player for the Ducks. So that's where I come down on it. I know it's not a definitive answer, but every time I watch Matayo Uiagalelei play, he looks like a first-round pick. The speed he's got coming off the edge and the power that he's got, that's the biggest difference in his game. His growth from last season to this year is a year ago felt like he was strong enough to play and fast off the edge, and that was his greatest attribute. Now, I feel like he's not just strong enough to play, he is a really strong guy who is hard to move around. Some of the run fits that he has had, I don't think that's the correct verbiage, but you get what I'm trying to say. Some of the sequences he's had this year defending the run, have arguably been more impressive than the times he rushes the passer. And he had a sack and the interception and a pressure here and there, like the big hit on third down. He can do a lot for this Oregon defense. Jordan Burch can do a lot for this Oregon defense. And going into Washington, but especially the Big Ten championship game, Oregon's an 18.5-point favorite against Washington. It's a lot of points. That's a lot of points. Not talking about that right now. Just thought I would throw it out there. Going into a Big Ten championship game, I'd really like to have Jordan Burch there. Why? Because I'd like to be as healthy as possible. But would I place that as high of a priority on my get back from injury and get healthy list as Marcus Harper? I would not. Because the drop-off on the defensive line is minimal somehow. And somehow it feels like there isn't really much of a drop-off. It's like, well, Burch isn't there, so that means another guy has to step up. And then Tatum Tuioti and Matayo Uiagalelei are just studs. And then you've kept the interior guys, knock on wood, healthy this entire season. So it's a tough question to answer. I'm curious what you guys think. Legitimately curious. Drop your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on Twitter, because I can't go in one particular direction. I think as I flush out my thoughts on this segment, I can say it's not Burch. But if you pick Jordan Burch, I don't know that you can take that as a ridiculous take. I don't think you can have that definitively be, no, it's definitely not Jordan Burch. Well, if I had to eliminate a guy, I guess it'd be him, because I've seen the defensive line play well without him in it. But then that leaves you with Matayo and Derek Harmon, and these guys are really, really good. Honorable mention for best or most important defensive player. This is where I'd separate. Jeff Bassa might be the most important player that isn't always the best. Fourth-year guy, third year with Lanning and Lupoy, signal caller on defense. I don't think you can overlook that particular factor. On the back end, Jabbar Muhammad be the top guy in the secondary. Brandon Johnson probably be a close second. But best player on defense for Oregon, I'd go Matayo or Harmon or Burch. Any one of those three. It just depends on the week, and that's a great place for Oregon to be right now. I did want to give a shout out, and I got this message from a Locked On Ducks insider out there for someone who I didn't shout out yesterday on the show, but someone felt was worthy, and as I thought about it, I went, yeah, I think you're right. How about Ross James? Ross James was this close, this close, to being the guy that ices the football game there on a 3-yard carry, and if he had, would have been immediately legendary. But Ross James, 49.5 yards a boot in a windy, cold Wisconsin day with a long of 61. If you go all the way back to the first season Dan Lanning was in charge in Eugene, the punting was last in the Pac-12. And something I said in the offseason was, hey, this is part of having a great defense. It's more important to fix the personnel and whatnot. But you know how much the defense can be helped by having a good punter? Ross James' ability to flip the field, how important was that? That was a defense and special teams game for Oregon on Saturday night, and special teams guys deserve their shout out. And if Pat Herbert throws a block on the fake field goal, Ross James runs for a first down, maybe runs for a touchdown, quite frankly. But he certainly would have picked up at least one more yard. Alas, it's all okay. Oregon won. Don't forget that. Don't forget, amidst all the things that Oregon needs to work on and can improve and questions we have about this, that, and the other thing, Oregon won the game 11-0 and facing bye week this week. I like their chances against bye. I think they covered the spread too.